A question we often get asked is why conservators sometimes wear gloves and sometimes not when handling museum objects. Although we emphasize wearing gloves when handling objects, there are actually no set rules. The conservator makes a decision on whether or not to wear gloves depending on the material, the task, and the nature and fragility of the object. The diversity of objects requires that we assess each object individually and make the right decision.
One of the few object types that we work with that you don't need to use gloves with is what we call brown furniture. Brown furniture objects are often jointed, they're wooden, and they have a veneer on them. And what you tend to find is that, with the exception of highly decorative French polished surfaces, these objects are robust enough and their surface coatings are robust enough for us to be able to handle them without gloves.
When handling metal objects, gloves are normally worn in order to avoid damaging the object. Acids and oils from fingers can have a corrosive effect on metals. In particular, this is a problem with historical metals. These can etch into the surface, can be very difficult to remove, and can ultimately affect the integrity of the object.
An important aspect of wearing nitrile gloves is not just to protect the objects, but also to protect the people handling the objects. Many objects in our collection have components that are inherently toxic or hazardous. There are many other objects that have been purposely contaminated, such as, for example, poison weapons. As organic materials are particularly vulnerable to being attacked by pests, they were treated with a vast array of pesticides from the 18th century up until the 1990s. That's why it's crucial to wear gloves when handling objects with suspected or confirmed contamination.
Wearing gloves also protect us from hazardous substances. For example, mold can sometimes be found on ceramics objects, as in the case of these terracotta figurines. When handling hazardous objects, conservators always make sure to dispose of gloves after use.
In the past, conservators at the British Museum wore white cotton gloves, and apparently each conservator had only one pair. But nowadays, conservators prefer to wear disposable nitrile gloves, which would protect them from objects and vice versa. There are a few main points when choosing the right glove. Firstly, the size. It is very important to wear the right size of glove in order to prevent any handling damage to the objects. Secondly, the thickness of the glove. Obviously, the thicker gloves are more protective for us, but they would also create problems for our manual dexterity. Thirdly, not to wear dirty and torn gloves when working on objects, as this defeats the main purpose of wearing gloves in the first place.
When we conserve documents, prints and drawings, we don't usually use gloves. We handle them with dry, clean hands. Hand washing will remove the dirt and the natural oils from hands, and is an effective alternative to use of gloves.
When working with wall paintings, we generally wear gloves to protect the objects. There's fragile pigments on the surface, and the oils in our hands will affect the pigment and the color. They also might wear away the surface. The gloves just prevent damage. And in this case, we created an edge to handle the objects so we avoid touching the object itself.
When treating archaeological objects, such as painted polychrome Egyptian coffins, we tend to wear gloves. We want to make sure that we're not transferring any dirt or dust that's on the surface to other areas on the object, as well as onto ourselves. From a health and safety perspective, Egyptian pigments were actually made from ground minerals, and this is why the colors remain so vibrant today. However, some of the pigments are actually made from toxic minerals, such as orpiment and realgar, which is used to make some yellows as well as some reds, and these can be hazardous to your health if ingested. When we deal with smaller and more delicate tasks, we use tweezers, and this actually means that you don't have to touch the surface of the object, so sometimes you'll see conservators not wearing gloves because you're not handling the object.
Often as textile conservators, we choose not to wear gloves and work with our bare hands. That is because sometimes we really need that extra sensitivity through our fingertips to be able to carry out our work and also to really understand the inherent fragility and strengths of the materials that we're working with.
As you can see, conservators wear gloves depending on the type of objects and the work they carry out on them. And when there's any doubt on how to handle objects, they are the best people to get advice from.
My name is Wendy Adamson and I'm one of the collections managers based here at the British Museum. Gloves, we love gloves. We're very lucky to have a very large and extensive conservation department, which means we can always refer back to them for individual help if we need. But our general rule from the collections management side is when in doubt, or if in doubt, always wear gloves. We have a few exceptions where we don't have to wear gloves, and that would be highly glazed ceramics. With gloves, a lot of the time, even with ones like this, where you get a slightly kind of raised area on the fingers to give you extra grip, really glazed ceramics can still feel like you can't feel them when you're wearing the gloves. So it's really, really nice to be able to just have skin contact. It's very important to have very clean hands when you are handling without gloves though, because the last thing you want to do is leave some terrible fingerprint and they'll know it was you. Sometimes when collections are really heavily used, we also make exceptions. Here in this beautiful arched room, we house the museum's cuneiform collection. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, cuneiform is basically unglazed ceramics with lots of cuneiform writing on. We're very popular with students and we get loads. We can actually have up to 12 people in this room, all studying lots of tablets. That's a lot of handling and that's a lot of in and out. And we've talked to the conservators about this and we've agreed that both the students and the staff don't have to wear gloves when we're handling cuneiform tablets. And that's been assessed by not only our personal reasons, the physical handling, but also we've done a risk assessment on the actual objects. Are they really going to be at risk from handling without gloves? And it's been decided that we can go with these without gloves. The other thing that we always avoid gloves with is works on paper. Now this is again to do with the grip because, as I said, even with the lovely nitrile gloves, you still don't get that tactile sense. Most of our paper collection is also mounted, and this is really nice because it means you don't have to touch the object. You can touch the mount and you avoid all of that close handling. Although again, always make sure you have clean hands because otherwise they'll know you've left a dirty smudge.